It began with whispers, with petitions, with voices raised in taverns, in assemblies, in the streets of Boston and Philadelphia. The year was 1775. The American colonies had lived under the British Crown for more than a century. But now, they questioned authority. They challenged empire. And soon, those whispers would become war drums. A war that would last 8 years. A war that would pit farmers against redcoats. A war that would give birth to a nation. This is the story of the American Revolutionary War. The struggle that transformed 13 colonies into the United States of America. After Britain's costly victory in the French and Indian War, London turned to its colonies for revenue. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Duties, the Tea Act. All designed to raise money. But to colonists, it was something more sinister, taxation without representation. Crowds gathered in Boston. The Sons of Liberty plotted in secret. Pamphlets circulated with fiery words, liberty, rights, freedom. Tensions spilled into violence. In 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists. The Boston Massacre. 3 years later, when a tax on tea was enforced, rebels boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of chests into the sea. The Boston Tea Party was defiance made visible. Britain responded with punishment. The coercive acts, closing Boston's port, stripping Massachusetts of self-rule. But repression only strengthened resolve. The colonies were no longer scattered provinces. They were beginning to think and act together. On the night of April 18, 1775, British troops marched from Boston toward Concord, hoping to seize colonial weapons. But riders were already on the road. Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott spreading the alarm. At dawn, in the town of Lexington, militia gathered on the village green. Facing them, hundreds of British soldiers. A single shot broke the silence. No one knows who fired it. But in that instant, the world changed. The British pressed on to Concord. But at the North Bridge, they met fierce resistance. Militiamen fired, and the redcoats fell. On their retreat to Boston, British soldiers faced an onslaught. Farmers firing from fences, women reloading muskets, the countryside alive with rebellion. This was no longer protest. It was war. Within days, thousands of militia surrounded Boston. The city was under siege. On June 17, 1775, British forces attempted to break out. On Breed's Hill, colonial soldiers waited. Twice the British charged. Twice they were thrown back. On the third assault, with powder gone, the colonists retreated. The British won the ground. But at a cost of over 1,000 casualties. The lesson was clear: these colonists would fight. And fight hard. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress met. They appointed George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Tall, dignified, steady, Washington took command outside Boston. With cannon hauled from Fort Ticonderoga by Henry Knox, he forced the British to evacuate in March 1776. Boston was free. But the empire was not done. The war began as a struggle for rights. But voices grew louder for something greater: independence. In January 1776, Thomas Paine's common sense swept the colonies, declaring that monarchy itself was a fraud. By summer, the Continental Congress debated separation. On July 4, 1776, they adopted Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. The colonies were no longer rebels. They were a new nation. But with independence declared, the full weight of Britain's power fell upon them. In August 1776, a massive British fleet appeared off New York. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of troops. The largest expedition Britain had ever launched. Washington's untested army faced disaster. At the Battle of Long Island, the Americans were outmaneuvered and routed. By winter, Washington retreated across New Jersey, his army ragged, morale crumbling. The revolution teetered on collapse. But on Christmas night, Washington struck back. Crossing the icy Delaware River, he surprised Hessian mercenaries at Trenton. Days later, he defeated the British at Princeton. The victories were small, but vital. They proved the revolution was not dead. In 1777, Britain launched a new plan. Cut off New England by seizing the Hudson River Valley. General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada. But American forces blocked his advance. At Saratoga, under General Horatio Gates and the daring of Benedict Arnold, the British were surrounded. On October 17, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army. The world took notice. The American cause, once fragile, now seemed possible. In France, the victory convinced King Louis XVI to act. The United States gained a powerful ally. Winter at Valley Forge was brutal. Washington's army shivered without shoes, without food, without hope. But in the cold came transformation. The Prussian officer Baron von Steuben drilled the soldiers, teaching discipline and modern tactics. By spring, the Continental Army was no longer a mob of volunteers. It was a fighting force. With France in the war, Britain faced a global conflict. Spain and the Netherlands joined as well. The fight for America was now part of a worldwide struggle. French officers like the young Marquis de Lafayette became symbols of the alliance. Money, weapons, and troops flowed into the American cause. But the war was far from won. In the South, Britain captured Savannah and Charleston. American armies were crushed. Yet in the backwoods, guerrilla fighters like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, harassed British troops. General Nathaniel Greene fought a war of movement, wearing down Cornwallis's army. The tide was turning again. By 1781, British General Cornwallis fortified Yorktown, Virginia, believing the Royal Navy would supply him. But fate intervened. A French fleet under Admiral de Grasse defeated the British at sea, cutting off Cornwallis. Washington seized the chance. With French troops under Rochambeau, he marched south. Together, they besieged Yorktown. For weeks, cannon fire shook the earth. Trenches inched closer. British defenses crumbled. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered. The war's decisive moment had arrived. Though skirmishes lingered, the war was effectively over. In Paris, American envoys Franklin, Adams, Jay, and Lawrence negotiated peace. On September 3, 1783, Britain recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation stretched from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. The rebellion had become a revolution. The revolution had become a republic. The course of the American Revolutionary War was long, brutal, uncertain. It brought defeat, despair, and near ruin. But it also forged resilience, courage, and a vision of liberty. From Lexington to Yorktown, from Boston Harbor to the fields of Saratoga, a people learned that freedom comes at a cost. The United States of America was born. Imperfect, fragile, yet alive. And its story, written in sacrifice and hope, still echoes across the centuries.